Today's episode is brought to you by The Armory. That's not a real sponsorship, it's just a Discord I run for people who like JRPGs. So, if you want to drop in, chat, bitch a bit like everybody else, I'd love to see you there. Check it out, links in the description. Kuro no Kiseki, aka The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak Part 1 is the 11th entry in the ongoing Kiseki continuity. For the uninitiated, The Legend of Heroes is a turn-based JRPG series set across one large interconnected continent with a focus on politics, world building, characters, and fantastic anime nonsense. The franchise was originally birthed from the Dragon Slayer series in 1989 with Dragon Slayer: The Legend of Heroes, eventually spinning off into its own franchise, The Legend of Heroes, and birthing a sub-series known as the Trails or Kiseki series with the 2004 release of Trails in the Sky First Chapter. From there, every new Legend of Heroes game has been part of this sub-series, with groups of entries serving as their own sub-arcs. Now, I promise, it sounds more complicated than it is. All you really need to know is that Trails in the Sky, up until now, is all one connected series with one big overarching plot. This entry represents what's arguably the biggest change to the series mechanics since the continuity began in 2004, and it serves as the first part to a new arc within the overarching narrative. And so, as usual, that begs the question, can you start the series with this game? And the answer to that is as annoying as the debates over the question usually is. The answer is a huge, resounding sort of. New characters, new locations, new baddies, and even new mechanics make this an almost ideal place to start. However, while I would say this is a reasonable entry point, I'd argue it's the least newcomer-friendly of the reasonable entry points so far. Unless you're one of those people who consider Trails of Cold Steel 3 a reasonable entry point, which I do not. In regards to this game, there's just so many different groups, characters, references, and name drops to old lore that actually for once doesn't get over-expounded upon, that I think a new player would be left confused or in the dark more than any other entry point. Like, sometimes a character will question a bad guy's powers or something, and another character will respond to the effect of, "It's just like that time X years ago in X place." But like, if you don't already know what they're talking about, then they're not actually providing an answer. They're merely alluding to an answer existing, which will leave new players pretty lost. So yeah, you can start here, and the story will function, but you have to concede to the idea that you will be left behind in several places. But also, I'm not your dad. Start at Farewell Ozamuria for all I care, it ain't my grave. So with that out of the way, and the sequel for this game being about 2 weeks away, let's get into the real discussion here. Let's look at the game that won old fans back to the franchise, breathed fresh air into the combat and exploration, added some much needed physics to its more, plot-heavy characters, and satisfied the more freaky fans by, modeling Olympia's feet better than anybody else's. I see what you did there, Falcom. You're sick. Bunch of sickos. And that's what Sonic games are for. So let's get into it.
My life's been a living nightmare for more than a decade now. So what's a little more fire when you're already in the depths?
Trails Through Daybreak represents a lot of things for the series, but one of the biggest and most recurring things you'll see in this review is that this game seems to have been built with intent on addressing and solving a lot of ongoing fan complaints. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of them. This can be seen right off the start with the story and characters. It takes no time at all for you to gain an understanding of your main character, Van Schwarzer, Van Arkwright. Van runs something of an odd jobs type business specializing in investigatory work for things that fall into the morally gray cracks of society. Though he himself has something of a dark streak, he is not himself really an immoral character. If anything, he shows time and time again to display excellent morals and understanding in the face of questionable dilemmas. In contrast to his work and professional demeanor, Van also has an insatiable love of sweets and an overly protective attitude towards his friends and his car, at times more so the latter.
This is Andalusia's late summer limited time edition. The specially made tart covered in Violette de Soleil figs from Oregon honey.
You are something of an expert, I see.
Similarly, the game's first new party member and regular business partner for Van, Agnes Claudel, immediately reveals to be a sweet, gentle-hearted but strong and committed young woman with an open mind and a willingness to participate in and explore the seedy underbellies of society and the work of Arkwright Solutions. She honestly works as a perfect counterpart to the main character. Agnes is also one of the first clients we see for Van at Arkwright Solutions, and she quickly gives the game a goal for its overarching plot, something Kiseki games usually lack or are left unclear until the closing chapters. Stolen from Agnes' family is a device known as the Genesis. However, this is one of many devices. This artifact is mysterious in origin but has deep ties to her family's past, and so she employs Arkwright Solutions with the long-shot task of hunting down the rest of them. From here, Agnes teams up with Van, traveling the beautiful and diverse eastern countryside of Zemuria, known as Calvard, a land like the rest of the country caught in the mists of the Orbital Revolution, a period of mass and excessive technological advancement. It is also a land caught in the wake of major political reform. Changes to Calvard's immigration policies and arts and culture affected the traditional image of the countryside, leaving some residents to struggle with the new face of Calvard. Though all of this is established refreshingly quick for the series, Trails Through Daybreak is also quick to fall into old routines, for better or worse. The structure established in Trails in the Sky first chapter persists here, where our main cast is made to spend a good deal of time doing their jobs rather than directly progressing the plot and story beats. This presents itself more or less as mandatory side quests. Completing these mandatory side quests is nice for the most part and builds out the world really well, helping you understand characters and locations just a little better to add more weight to the proper plot events. However, in Trails Through Daybreak, I cannot deny that these segments come up far too often and last just a little too long, especially if you're a bozo like me and you complete all the side quests as well as all the optional social events and optional scenes that appear during these times. This is a recurring issue with Trails games, really, adding a lot of unnecessary bloat to the runtime, and I don't usually mind, cause I like what the games are bloated with, but it feels like it was taken to a new level here, perhaps just a step too far. During times of great peril in the game, the plot will stop dead in its tracks. 3 times, really, anytime there's a major event, to give you 3 new batches of side quests and 3 new batches of social events. And it can feel really inappropriate and out of place, often pumping the brakes when the story needs to be pushing the gas. All this resulting in a game that, on normal difficulty, took me over 100 hours to complete. And here I was thinking the game would be shorter than all the other first chapter entries due to the new speed-focused combat mechanics. So imagine my shock when I find out it's actually the longest first chapter game, and I didn't even bloat the runtime with a fishing minigame, because there isn't one this time. And on that note, I take back when I called this a JRPG. You know, if it doesn't really have a fishing minigame, is it really a JRPG? These are the questions we should be asking ourselves. One cool thing about some of the side quests, however, and many key events in the main plot, is the various decision points, allowing Van and party to pick their path forward, skewing the party's morality stats, thus altering the outcomes of many scenes and even opening or closing certain options in late-game story events. Playable characters, like the plot, are handed out in drip supply in this game, but this isn't really a bad thing. It's not like Sky First Chapter where you spend most of the game as just a duo. It's not like Crossbell where you get your main small team right away and just stick with them for the vast majority of the runtime. And it's not like Cold Steel where you get a large group all at once and have to navigate the chaos. In a way, it's a bit of a middle ground between all 3. Your team of playable characters by the end is quite large, and you get them at a decent enough pace that you get to learn about them all in detail without dividing your attention too much between other cast members fighting for screen time. If we consider Van and Agnes as the 2 main characters and the rest as the B cast, I'd say my favorite characters are actually there in the B cast. Katra, Aaron, Judith all come to mind. When it comes to cast chemistry, though the characters are incredibly diverse in their background and personalities, the chemistry almost feels more like what I would expect in an Atelier game. Part of me misses the chaos of the Cold Steel cast's first year of school together, where half the cast were butting heads and had loads of conflicts with each other. In such large group sizes, conflict just kinda makes sense and seems almost inevitable when they're all thrown together without warning. With Daybreak, however, there's not much in the way of inter-cast conflict once people join your party. They're all just kind of friends looking out for each other and looking to fix each other's character flaws without getting too heated about it. This isn't a criticism, really, it's still well executed and makes sense, but it can make their development as a team feel a little more static, or at least a little too dependent on just getting to know the new guy before they join the party. I would have liked a little more to work with there, but their individual stories still carry them through nonetheless. Although where this series has been going for so long and there are so many characters, some characters do have familiar character flaws that we've seen in main characters in the previous games, which results in a few conversations here and there just feeling a little too familiar, as I hinted to earlier with the Van Schwarzer reference. In terms of emotional engagement, I don't think the game is a slouch for at all. When I said that Falcom listened to fan complaints, I think this is really highlighted here. Death has a meaning again. The game is significantly darker than before, stakes feel real. Strangely enough though, I found myself most emotionally invested in an NPC character arc. A character arc that turned a fairly hateable dickwad of a character into somebody that I found myself really rooting for to succeed in the end. And it's those fleeting little moments that I found really made Trails Through Daybreak quite special. And it's not just the darker tone and the more present, more cohesive, overarching, self-contained plot that really sets this game apart, but the combat has also seen a massive overhaul. An overhaul that is, without a doubt, the biggest transformation this series has ever seen, at least in terms of its mechanics. So let's get into that.
Take this! Deploying stars!
In a series first, Trails Through Daybreak introduces an action combat sequence. This action combat can be used to dispense of enemies quickly while exploring, or be used to gain advantage in a connected turn-based combat sequence, if you choose to launch one. In a way, it feels like an expansion on the combat advantage system seen in the last few games, only built out enough that turn-based combat can be completely avoided in most situations. That said, the system is lacking for depth and isn't necessarily made to replace turn-based battles. Rather, the intent is to aid in turn-based combat and exploration. So you have your basic light attacks, the same attacks you use to break objects in dungeons, and a heavy attack which can only be used after you charge up this meter through your light attacks, which deals additional damage to enemies' break meters. You also have an evade command, which when combined with the enemy's very obvious telegraphs, makes action combat almost impossible to perform poorly in. Enemies will occasionally use non-evadable attacks, as in you can't roll your way out of them, but these are clearly telegraphed as well, and you only need to back up to avoid them. If an enemy guard breaks you, then battle automatically switches to turn-based with enemy advantage. At any time on your turns in turn-based combat, you can switch back to active combat, except for when you're fighting important bosses, which usually start and must remain as turn-based. When you break an enemy's gauge in active combat, you can deploy shards, essentially dealing a load of damage to the enemies, and beginning turn-based combat with player advantage. Turn-based combat functions quite similar to previous games with a few new bells and whistles. Arts and crafts return and all work the same. Arts being magic attacks and support spells made available by equipping orbits to your characters, and costing EP to use, EP which is typically recharged with consumable items. And crafts, character-specific attacks that require CP to use, CP being recharged through combat. The big changes here involve a greater focus on character and enemy positioning. Certain crafts may have special effects when dealing damage to an enemy's back or flanks. Similarly, combat links are now relative to character positioning. The character you're closest to is likely who you share the combat link with. Combat links being shared combat bonuses between two active party members in close proximity. Bonuses that are expanded upon by raising character relationship ranks during social events or main story sequences. There's also a new guard mechanic, like just a normal guard, like blocking. This might not seem too useful at first, but through the new approach to the orbit system, it can be shaped to be very beneficial. Not that I ever made it beneficial, okay, because like blocking is for losers. On the back end, the orbit system has been almost entirely revamped. It may look familiar and in part still act familiar, but it's more tightly controlled to prevent getting overpowered. It doesn't prevent it, it just makes it take a little bit longer. Certain orbment slots are colored to only allow certain element types to be slotted there, while certain orbments are categorized to only fit into certain orbment lines. As you slot your orbments, they contribute to an elemental pool for the line they're slotted to. As the pool increases and the number goes up, bonuses and buffs unlock that contribute to your combat efficacy. As alluded to earlier, some of those buffs and benefits are specifically for the blocking mechanic. To make full use of these buffs, you'll also need to make use of the new S-Boost feature. S-Boosts use this very easy to charge meter down here, a meter that expands its size throughout battle and resets its size at the end of every fight. This thanks to the turn order bonuses you see flowing along the top meter here. These, as their name implies, are bonuses you get on your turn, and that might mean healing, CP up, instant KO, and a whole slew of other things. Unfortunately, unlike the old games, these are not as manipulatable as they used to be. You can no longer just steal an enemy's critical chance by casting your S-Craft. S-boosting doesn't just unlock all your buffs, however. It also enables characters to use their strongest crafts, their S-Craft. Formerly, an S-Craft only required a character to have 100 CP, with the stronger version being available at 200 CP. This was easy to abuse in previous games and reworked to now have two requirements: 100 CP and a level 2 S-Boost. On paper, this looks good for balance, but it falls apart pretty quickly. Without the 200 CP S-Craft, every level 2 S-Boost can be used to perform 2 enemy attack interrupting S-Crafts back to back. And because the S-Boost meter charges so fast and gets so big so early in all the large boss battles, this results in a situation where S-Craft interrupts are more game-breaking than ever, becoming incredibly easy to launch up to 8 S-Crafts back to back, 2 for every playable character. And yeah, it's a little ridiculous, stupid even, some might say brain dead, idiotic, pathetic, piss poor balance, for dummies, and yeah, sure, it is. I wouldn't have it any other way though. I love breaking these games, like, come on, give it to me, man. S-Crafts and S-Boosts don't just break boss battles either. It turns all standard battles into a rinse-repeat of the same thing. Break an enemy's guard with active combat, launch your shards to enter turn-based combat, and immediately use an S-Craft, and the battle is over. It was my experience in the back half of the game in standard battles, enemies basically never got a turn outside of active combat, and during active combat, it was pretty easy to avoid all their attacks. Thing is, active combat charges your CP and S-Boost so fast that this strategy almost never fails. While I still have fun doing this, however, I do have one complaint, and that's about the balance of real-time combat. It seems the only character that really does significant damage is whoever you're controlling. Everybody else seems to do 10% or so of their typical attack, which doesn't account for very much and makes characters like Farida completely useless in real-time combat, unless of course you're controlling her. This because Farida mainly deals chip damage, but with every little bit of chip damage being calculated on its own, you only get 10% of each one, you might be dealing 0 to 1 damage every time she hits somebody with her gun. And I also just don't really like controlling Farida in active combat, so she wasn't very useful for me. Now you can try and control and manipulate some of this with your weapon, accessories, armor, and orbit buildouts, but I vastly prefer building towards alternative goals. And with all this, if you're still somehow struggling with the game, the food and eating system is completely broken as well. The more you eat, the more you raise in gourmet ranks, and every time you raise a gourmet rank, your entire party gets a permanent stat buff. I didn't realize this until about the last quarter of the game, and I was already overpowered then. Once I did realize it, I basically just steamrolled everything else the game had to offer.
Let's go!
Now there is one other part of combat we need to talk about before we move on, and that's the nightmare battles. Basically, this is like controlling mechs in Trails of Cold Steel. It's a different take on the turn-based battle system that's more resource-oriented, a bit more give and take. And like those mech battles, it is really hard to lose these unless you just do not have a mind for strategizing at all. Like if you're somebody who can not play chess and plan 2 steps ahead, this might prove a little bit difficult, but generally they are some of the easiest battles in the game, just due to the nature of what they are. That said, I don't really have much complaints about how they work. Van takes on the role of the Grendel, and he's the real big damage dealer, while everybody else just sort of has to play support to him. And it's not too hard to figure out who has to support him and in what way. But easy or not, it is nice that there's variety in combat and you get this sort of mix-up every now and then. Just like I never complained about them in the previous games with the mech battles acting kind of exactly the same way with the same sort of flaws, I'm not going to complain about the Van nightmare battles here. I think they're pretty rad, and I look forward to seeing how they expand on the battle system and the lore of why these battles exist in the next installment.
What is this feeling?
So I guess at this point, all that's really left is to look at some technical stuff. And this game's seen a bit of an increase in that area as well. In terms of music, I'll say the game has some really good tunes, like the highs are very high, but a lot of the rest of the OST, arguably the majority of it, feels like mock-ups or redos of past tracks that brings a warm familiarity to mind, but never quite reaches the heights of the tracks that they're imitating. There are no songs in the soundtrack that I would call bad or anything, but this one is certainly not an all-timer. And the voice acting. For people who enjoy English dubs, I feel it's generally agreed that since the series started getting dubs, the outcome has been quite agreeable. Daybreak performs admirably here as well with its main cast, but anytime there's a side character with an accent, it starts to feel a little rough. Outside of that, the actors are matched well to their characters and turn in good performances, especially the characters with a bit of a darker or more villainous streak to them. I'd say the Japanese cast is borderline flawless, but if it has the same issues with the fake foreign accents, my sheltered North American ears wouldn't be able to tell. So in that regard, Japanese may be preferable, but I have a baby and cannot give my undivided attention to subtitles all the time these days, so suck it, I guess I'm playing in English. Not that I mind. I have to give the game some credit as well for its NPC designs. It's no secret in a series with a world so large that the NPCs are usually designed using the same handful of assets, and that can make a lot of them look, similar. The same can be said for this game, but that handful of assets has been massively expanded, allowing the children to look more childlike and the elderly to look a lot more elderly than they used to. It's just nice to see. Also, additional props for the fan service in the game, especially for people who have kept up with reading the in-universe books in this series. The UI in the game is pretty decent in battle, but I did struggle a little in reading the menus with its various fonts and different orientations, sizes, and kernings. Menu navigation also could use a little bit of streamlining, but it's not too hard to figure out. Now, I played this game on the PS5 and I thought the performance there was pretty darn good, honestly. It'd be pretty embarrassing if it wasn't. But there was at least one glitch in a pretty late game boss battle that just absolutely caused the frame rate to tank. Thing is, it was a localized issue and it was pretty easy to play around or play through, but the frame rate got about as bad as a frame rate can get.
Have some more!
When all is said and done, I think Trails Through Daybreak is a good first chapter game. It might be a little bit better than good. It's just that it falters a little harder in places than I would have liked to see. It did struggle to keep my interest with all the interruptions to the action, and I found myself a bit annoyed when these interruptions occurred during really climactic moments. And when I think back on when I first put this game in my PS5, the giddiness and almost surreal feeling I had over getting to start a new arc after so long, that wavering interest I felt at various points throughout the game just stings a little more than it would have if this happened in any previous game. But I can concede how strong I feel about this is very much a me thing. But the formula itself isn't bad, and with good characters, some epic moments, and a totally invigorating and fresh new experiment in combat, it carried me through the game despite the issues I had. I only wish it was carrying me through to something great with the upcoming sequel. Something that would address my biggest concerns I had here or validate the issues I felt, in a way that makes me reconsider them, as Reverie did for Cold Steel 4. But with what I heard about Daybreak 2 so far, I'm a little worried that my biggest issues with this game are only getting bigger with the next one. And if that's the case, Farewell Ozamuria is gonna have a hell of a lot of lifting to do. And I really don't doubt that it will be able to do it if it has to. Even if Daybreak 2 turns out to be Daybreak Poo, I'm still gonna be sticking on this ride. I'm too invested at this point to be jumping off the train now. And I feel like the end of this giant story is really just right around the corner. And I'm super excited to see how things go from here on out. Albeit a little hesitant based on what I've heard for Daybreak 2 so far. But of course, I won't really know how I feel about that game until I play it myself, so if you want to find out how I feel about that, stick around and maybe I'll have a review for it out 2 weeks before the next game comes out. As always, folks, I know this video is super late. I appreciate you watching it despite all that, and I hope to see you again here in the future, so thanks for watching. Why do they call the main character Van if he drives a truck? And what's up with all the characters in this game having names that are not at all pronounced the way you'd think they are when you're reading them off?
That hits the spot.
2. Turns out to be Daybreak Poo.